My name's Wade Kirkpatrick. I was in the class of 75. I was at the high school for the first 3 years and played on the 1974 state championship team. Played for Coach Alvin Bressler, and Michael Gross was the principal at that time.
Welcome to a special edition of the Shades Cahaba Oral History Project. I'm your host, Sean Wright. When I was lining up stories and guests for 2020, I was talking with former high school principal and superintendent Michael Gross, and he told me about a project he was involved with. A book was being written about the first Homewood State football championship team in 1974. I reached out to the author, Wade Kirkpatrick, and asked him if he would like to come on the Shades Cahaba Oral History Project and tell us about it. The proceeds of the book go to a great cause. I'll let Wade fill us in on the book, and we discuss that special football team. So tell me about, did you play football all your life?
I did. I started in the third grade.
They probably made you. I'm assuming you were big back then.
It was the thing to do. I'll put it that way. It was the thing to do, and from the third grade on, I was playing. I played at Edgewood, and then there was a Homewood Little League football team, and then my sixth grade year at Edgewood, we had a school team, then the Homewood Junior High team, and then the Homewood High School team. And then I played at University of North Alabama in college.
I thought you went to LSU.
Well, I did for 2 years on the scout team.
Okay.
And then I transferred up to UNA and was a letterman 2 years.
I talked with Herman Maxwell, who was on the team with you guys. And I asked him the same question. He's a big man, and I said, "I bet you play." They made you play from day one, and he said his biggest obstacle was his mother. Letting his mother, let him out there. So
Herman was a real good player.
Yeah.
He played defense, and I played offense.
Homewood started the championship team would have been. Was it the third year?
Third year of the high school,
and that's pretty big. I know that we had football players from Homewood who were playing at Shades Valley at the time, but to
bring them back
and get them all together and actually teach them up, I guess, until that year. What was the secret? What made the Homewood teams special back then?
Well, we had some really good athletes in that first class, that senior class. Randy Galbraith got a scholarship to Auburn. The other captain was Peter Brash, and he was a really good player. So we had good players, but the secret was Alvin Bressler. He had played at Auburn from Mountain Brook, Homewood area, and everybody knew him. And he came in as a 23-year-old, hired a staff, and really got the program off. And that's what this book is about, fighting Patriots the first 3 years of Homewood High School football. And it focuses on Alvin and the things that he did in 72, 73, and 74 with his staff to build a program. And it culminated in him being the youngest coach to this day to win a state championship in Alabama. He was 26.
Wow.
Yeah. So part of the book is about, or part of why we're writing the book, is that we have several records that still hold from those 3 years, the state championship on the third year being one, but the 6-4 record in 72 for a first-year school, nobody's ever done that before.
Now, Coach Bressler, where did he coach before Homewood?
He was at Anniston 1 year. Prior to that, he played with the San Francisco 49ers, and before that, he was one of Pat Sullivan's receivers, that trio of receivers, when Beasley and Sullivan were so famous at Auburn.
So why do you think the Homewood Brain Trust chose him? I mean, that's a bold choice.
Yeah,
maybe it
was a bold choice. That's really a good way to put it. And he played at Shades Valley, so he knew a lot of people. And when he found out that they were hiring a football coach, he put in his application. Well, Virgil Nunn was the superintendent, and he was the one that made the decision. There were the Shades Valley coaches that Alvin played for. Bill Legg was the head coach for Alvin. He had influence. They asked him what he thought. He said, give him a chance. And so they did.
It's surprising, as a man in my 50s, having a 26-year-old as the head coach is surprising.
Yeah, well, obviously half of the parents were Auburn fans. Half of them were Alabama fans, but even the Alabama fans knew what a good player he was.
Right.
And so, that obviously the Auburn fans didn't have a problem with it.
Right. I think over the years we've had a couple of Auburn and Alabama players that have coached at Homewood High School.
Yeah. It's through the years, sure have.
So you've mentioned this book. Let's get straight to that. Tell me again, what's the book and why did you guys write it?
Okay, well, it's called Fighting Patriots, the First 3 Years of Homewood High School Football. And this is a follow-up to what we did in 2009. We got together and put together a foundation based around one of our players, Randy Smith, who was a captain on that 74 team. He was a police officer in Birmingham and was shot in the line of duty and was disabled and handicapped. And we wanted to do something for him. So the weekend of the We Love Homewood parade, we went to the mayor and we said we want to put on a benefit. And so we rented out the hall in Soho. It was brand new. And we had a dinner with speakers and raffles and memorabilia, and we had players from Alabama and players from Auburn that came and did, sign the memorabilia, and we raised about $40,000. And so in '09, we took part of that money and we created a scholarship called the Randy Smith Scholarship at Homewood High School. And it's awarded to the player on any sport who overcomes the most obstacles to play that sport in his senior year. And it was a $1,500 scholarship for 10 years, and it just ran out in 19. So we are writing the book with the hopes of raising enough money. The proceeds of the book will go to refund that scholarship. If we're not able to make enough to do the scholarship, we're going to give it to Children's Harbor Charity.
When are you expecting this book to come out?
Well, we would like to launch it at the We Love Homewood Day. We'd like to be there with the books and be able to start selling them then. It's hard to say. Cutoff for the contributions to the book is the last day of this month, into January. And we've got volunteers to edit it, and then we'll be going to Amazon with it, and it'll be on Amazon, and they are real good about letting you just buy the number of books that you need. Since it's just a local interest book, we don't anticipate having a huge demand, but there's a lot of alumni. I think in the right setting, at $10, we might sell enough to do a few years of the scholarship or, give the money to the Children's Harbor. Those contributions, we now have 30 of the players and coaches that have reached back into their memory bank and come up with stories. And we're trying not to do, statistics and all of that, more the human interest side of what happened. For example, our center, Pat Weaver, is a surgeon's nurse at UAB and has been all these years. Coach Beeson, who was a referee up in Walker County in 1995, had a heart attack on the field. And the helicopter rushed him to UAB, and he was laying there about to have anesthesia, and Weaver was leaning over him and said, "I got you right where I want you now, Coach." and Coach Beeson said he was very thankful that it was Pat Weaver that was about to be on the surgeon's team. That's the kinds of stories that we want to tell.
Well, there's tons of statistical information out there. I found some stuff just the other day when I was looking through, and it looks like they they mined the Heritage yearbook for
Right,
the information.
right.
But it was a really great year. So in '74, you won every game but one,
Right.
and you lost to Hueytown.
We did, and that was the second time we ever played in that stadium. We won the first time we were in that stadium against Jeff Davis, and then in the rain, Hueytown had a really good team, and they got, we had a lot of mistakes, and they got the better of us, beat us by a touchdown, and then we wound up being paired with them in the first round of the playoffs, and actually got the better of them at their place.
And one of my favorite scores here is the week after Hueytown, and you played Shades Valley High School, the old mothership, I guess we should say.
That's right, yes.
And you beat them like a drum, 37-0. Were you taking it out on them because of Hueytown, or just because they were the old school?
Well, I think they actually were a 3A school, and they had a good season that year. Yeah, that was a lot of fun because it was a rival, and those kids were from Cahaba Heights, and they were 3A because they only drew from Cahaba Heights since there was no longer Homewood feeding into that school. So they were a little down, but they had a good year as a 3A school. And
now, when you left, or when Homewood left Shades Valley, did that really make for a nice rivalry?
it did. It did. We played them, first game, first year in 1972, and they beat us 20-10. And but it was our first game. We had a sophomore quarterback. We had several sophomores starting, and because even though the seniors that came over were good players, there weren't a lot of them. There were just, a handful of players that were seniors, and so Alvin had to reach down and play some young people, which paid off for him 2 years later with the experience.
Yeah, I was about to say, that was exceptional. Now, one thing that Herman told me about was the year before this season, you guys were playing, was it a jamboree or something like that?
Well, it was called the Crippled Children's Clinic at Legion Field.
You know what I'm talking about there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We played Banks, and they had several players that went on to play at Alabama on that team. Good team. They were the reigning state champs, and we didn't make the playoffs that year, but we had the choice of either play Mountain Brook for our last game or play in the Children's Clinic, and we chose to play in the Children's Clinic. At halftime, we were ahead 10-7, and then they beat us 35-10. So they really came on in the second half. But one of those touchdowns, they scored with 10 seconds to go. Obviously, the game was in their hands, but they decided to run up the score. And they acted like they were going to down the ball and then stood up and threw a long pass. That stuck in our craw. So I'm sure what Herman talked about was that the next year when we got them in the playoffs, we had that revenge factor going for us.
Yeah, he was pretty much a never again. We're never going to let that. I think it still bothers him to this day that happened.
Yeah.
And I believe it was the quarterback, Jeff Rutledge?
He was, yeah. Jeff Rutledge was the quarterback. He didn't play in that game in the playoffs. He had gotten hurt, I believe, against Woodlawn, which was when Tony Nathan played for Woodlawn, and it was the Tony and Jeff show. There were 50,000 people for a high school football game at Legion Field that year, that week.
I think what I like about the schedule and the ones that we had was we didn't have as many class levels, so we got to play our natural rivals. We got to play Shades Valley, and we got to play Vestavia,
right,
and John Carroll and Barry, which is now's Hoover for people who are listening who don't know, and obviously Mountain Brook, and I really enjoyed that. And I was looking through here, so Homewood beat Mountain Brook 48-6 that day, and if this is correct, and if I'm correct about this, the winning touchdown, or not the winning touchdown, the only touchdown that they scored was scored by future MTV VJ Alan Hunter.
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct. Alan played flanker, and in fact, when we were in the ninth grade, we played Mountain Brook, at Mountain Brook. And in the ninth grade, Alan Hunter scored on the last play of the game to beat us. So we never forgot that.
And I'm sure there are probably a lot of people that played on these teams that have gone on and done many things. But before we get to the championship game, I want to kind of go down a list of all-state players from Homewood at the time. In 72, we had Randy Galbraith, who was a second-team all-state.
Right.
Rick Powers was in 73 at linebacker and guard. He was a third team and an honorable mention.
Mm-hmm.
But once we get to your team, so you were a first team, what did you play, tight end?
Tight end, yes.
And then we had Rick Powers again.
Right.
So you went to LSU and ended up at North Alabama and played there. Rick Powers went to Tennessee. He was a first team. He was a linebacker. And I think everybody in Alabama knows Murray Legg.
Right.
And his father was the coach at
Shades Valley when Alvin Bresser played.
There's our connection. And then finally Mark Robbins, who the next year in 75 was a second team All-State, and he went to Auburn. So we had a nice group of players come out of there.
Absolutely. And Mark was a junior that year, and Mark still to this day holds the record for most interceptions in a season. He had 8 as a junior.
What bothers me is we had such good teams here, and now my son's at the high school now, and they've got good teams.
Mm-hmm.
But yet when I was in Homewood, we didn't have such good teams.
Well, there was a 20-year lull there between when we won it and then in 94 was the next state championship team. I think a good part of that time they were moving up and down from 4A to 3A, then up to 5A when there was a 6A. I mean, there was a period of time, I think, where the city of Homewood was not growing so much. So you didn't have as many students to draw from. I think that was part of it. But when they did start winning in 94, they carried right on through because I think they're up to 5 state championships now and 17 regional championships. So they've done really well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's nice. It's fun to go to the games, and even this past year when it was, I think they thought it was going to be a down year, and they still played really well. Right. It was an enjoyable game. I thought all the kids did great.
Yeah.
Let's go through the season a little bit. The end of the season's over. It's time for the playoffs. How did y'all handle that? What went on in the playoffs? Do you have any idea that y'all might be contenders?
We were a Cinderella. They called us a Cinderella. Actually, the way it started was there was a dispute as to who actually made the playoff. We felt like we made it. Tuscaloosa County felt like they made it. Both schools had to make their plea to the Alabama State High School Athletic Association, and it actually wound up going to before the Alabama Supreme Court. We're the only high school that's ever gone before the Supreme Court and had the case heard. You know, I won't get into the details of what the situation was. Suffice it to say, our city attorney and Mr. Gross went down to Montgomery and cleared it all up. And it took us a week to find out, but we got to go.
You finished out the season, like we said, you beat Mountain Brook.
Right.
And then we get into the playoffs, and the next game is against Hueytown, which is the only loss of the season.
That's right. And this time we go to their place to play, but it's still raining. I mean, it's another slog fest in the rain.
What was the difference in that game?
We had 5 turnovers the first time they beat us, and we didn't have any turnovers the night, and they had several. I think turnovers was big. And, you know, that was the third game of the season. We had obviously improved a lot as the season went on.
Then the next game is against Banks, the team we just spoke about a minute ago.
Right.
And y'all win 12-0.
Right.
What's special about that one?
Well, the defense really came into its own. Part of that was because the defense was playing so well, we became a more conservative offense. We didn't throw the ball as much. We didn't have to. We drove the ball up and down the field, only scored 1 touchdown and kicked 2 field goals.
I think this is from the Homewood Heritage, the yearbook, but the last paragraph here says, "For the record, the Homewood Patriots were the first team since 1971 when Hueytown did it to completely shut out Banks.
Right.
Homewood players, tough with spirit and the want of revenge, proved that they were one of the best teams in the state when Banks was gloriously, terrifically, and blissfully whooped.
Well, you know, we shut out Banks and we shut out Berry that year, and they were both powerhouses. So the Cinderella slipper really didn't fit. I didn't think.
So the next game is against Anniston. And again, you're playing at Legion Field.
Mm-hmm.
So what was it like playing at Legion Field? I would imagine in '74, Legion Field was the place to be.
It was a lot of fun, but you know, one of the stories about playing there that sticks in my mind is we wore red Converse tennis shoes. The turf was so worn down, cleats did not get traction, but those tennis shoes worked great.
Boy, I bet that'd have been fun as a high school kid.
It was.
So you guys played Anniston, the Anniston Bulldogs, and you won 18-0.
Right.
So that is 2 shutouts in a row. I like this. It says, while Anniston posed a serious threat late in the game, it doesn't really seem like it to me.
No, they could not move the ball, and we, again, could score pretty much when we needed to, but we didn't. You know, Alvin had coached at Anniston. Alvin did not run up the score on people. You know, we could have scored like Banks did the year before, but Alvin's just not that kind of coach. You don't do that. That's not class. I think that Anniston, you know, obviously played competitively, but no, it was never close.
So it seems here that Anniston had a highly rated running back named Ronald Young, and he only got 3 yards rushing.
Right. Yeah, they really closed. And his brother played wide receiver, and they had.
And he got 1 catch for 3 yards.
Yeah, and they had a good quarterback, but the defense really closed them down that day.
All right, so you win the game, and you guys are on to the finals against Dothan. So tell me about that game. I know you remember every minute of it.
Well, it's been 45 years. It's amazing what you remember and what you don't. The fact that, you know, I'm writing this book has this stuff kind of fresh on my mind and have gotten stories from everyone. Of course, you know, really what we had there was Stedman Shealy was the quarterback for Dothan. They had 8 guys that went on and played for some college program. So they were loaded and very talented. It was a cold night and it was another rainy night, and so that accounts for the low scoring. They had a great running back who I think played at Florida State. He got a broken tackle in the first half and ran a 70-yard touchdown. That was really the only thing they did until the last series of the game. They had one more chance, and Stedman threw the ball in the end zone, and the ball went off the receiver's hands. And he said all he saw, he got knocked down, he said all he saw was the water splash up from the ball hitting it. And we held on to win 10-7.
The way the game went here, and I kind of read through some of this, they scored first in the first quarter with that run you were just talking about. Then Homewood scores a field goal in the second.
Right.
Then you come back after halftime, and in the third quarter, Homewood quarterback Murray Legg, who completed 7 of 15 passes for 72 yards, would pitch out to running back Lee Edwards for a 21-yard touchdown and for the final 10-7 margin of victory. And as you said, they mounted a late effort that did not pay off for them, and you win. You guys win.
And we won. And, you know, I'll never forget the ball hitting the wet field because the guy was open. And Stedman put it right where he could have gotten it. But I think that we ran the beer offense, which Murray would read the defensive players, and then he would either keep the ball. It's like modern day run RPOs, run pass option, but he would read the defense, and he might keep it, or he might hand it off to the fullback, or he might pitch it to Jimmy Lee. That pitch was responsible for a lot of touchdowns that year.
Coach Bressler, how long did he coach at Homewood?
3 years. He went to Vestavia and was head coach for a couple of years, and went to Anniston, coached for a couple of years, and then he went into the insurance field, and he just retired at the end of December from 30 years as the CEO of Smith Lanier Insurance.
Money was not flowing when they started the school. He was telling me that he was lucky to get equipment and
Right.
things like that.
Alvin tells the story of the first year we went up to Berry to play Tarrant, and they beat us late in the game. And we got on our bus, our little school bus, and we were going back to Homewood, and Tarrant comes by in one of those Trailways buses and honks their horn. Alvin said, never again. We rode Trailways buses from that point on. So he did everything first class. He was really one of the first coaches who had played in college and wanted to try to build a college-like atmosphere for the players in high school. We had shirts that we wore to the pep rallies. We went to the movies on Thursday nights. And, the boosters fed us steaks at our pregame meal. All of those things were not things that were done in high school before that time. Peter Brash went on to coach at Vestavia for 30 years, the defensive coordinator up there. He was in that first graduating class at Homewood. I quote him in the book. He talked about the fact that Alvin was 30 years ahead of his time. It was about the turn of the century when all the high schools started doing these kinds of things. I didn't mention that Alvin's on the list to be considered to be inducted to the Alabama State Hall of Fame for his playing days and his coaching days. So that's another reason that we're writing this book, is so he can distribute copies to the people who are making that decision.
Push him over the top.
Yeah, hopefully.
They had the same issue with Piggy Mitchell I was telling you about. But he had the same thing. He was at Shades Cahaba, went to Shades Valley, then Hewitt Russell for years. And they had to really push to get him into the State Hall of Fame.
Well, Alvin's being considered on the seniors, for the Seniors Hall of Fame. And he was, on the docket throughout the years for his playing days at Auburn. Just never got voted in, but this time they consider the coaching and the playing, so maybe he will.
You think this book's going to come out in March?
March or April.
April, something like that.
Yeah.
And we're going to be able to order it on Amazon.
Right.
And will there be a Kindle book, I'm assuming?
I don't know about that, but we will have paperback copies for sale at bookstores around Homewood.
You probably don't know anything about the history of Shades Cahaba High School. So the high school was around from the 20s until 1949, and then they became Shades Valley. And one of the remarkable things about Shades Cahaba High School, and I'm going to have an episode on it soon, but they had a really, really good sports program. They early on in the 20s, they had some basketball leagues. Coach Piggy Mitchell, who is a god to the people at Shades Valley and Shades Cahaba at the time, was a coach who started a dirt court basketball league for schools who didn't have gyms to play in. They had a really good baseball team. And you've passed the Shades Cahaba field, and in the 40s, that was one of the first, and it might be the first high school in Alabama that actually had lights. They had lights and electronic scoreboard, and they had bleachers on both sides. They had, on the Ponciana side, there was concrete bleachers, and on the school side, there was some pretty substantial metal bleachers. So they would play, I know baseball games were played there because they had lights, and they were really they did really well, at least in the 40s and even in the 30s and stuff like that.
Well, my grandmother used to tell me stories about, she went to Phillips High School downtown Birmingham, but lived out near the Eastwood Mall. So they commuted in to go to Phillips, but she would tell me stories about Shades Cahaba from back in her day, because she knew I lived in Homewood.
She thought you'd be interested.
Yeah, exactly. Although I went to Edgewood, but we lived on a street that was the cutoff. So Rick Powers and Curtis Finch, who lived at the top of the street, went to Shades Cahaba, and I lived at the bottom of the street and went to Edgewood.
So what street was that?
Shades Park Drive,
Okay.
off Ridge Road.
Yeah. No, well, I grew up on Kensington Road, so I was kind of on the edge, but
you
close
were.
enough.
So you went to Shades Cahaba,
Shades Cahaba.
obviously.
Now, Edgewood is actually going to celebrate its 100th anniversary in 2026. So hopefully I can do some stories for them as well before.
Well, I had some of the teachers that were there from year one.
Really? All right, so what are you doing now? Well, or what did you do?
What I did, I'm retired from the software business. I spent 30 years in PC software. But you asked what I do now. I'm an author. I just published my first book. It's called Lightning Storm. It was published by Page Publishing. It only was released in December on Amazon. And it's about high tech in the 80s and the 90s. So, I blended in, it's fictional accounts of the things like we were just talking about, those times, those early days of the PC, all the way out to California where, the story picks up. The characters are entrenched in the changes going on with software, and they get mixed up with Enron and get into the middle of those rolling blackouts, which I lived through. I lived through the riots, and all of that's in there. So that's my plug for my book.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. I'm excited to see the book, and let me know when it comes out and everything else, and we'll make sure that we promote it on shadescahabahistory.com and all of our Facebook, social media outlets.
If you decide you want to talk to Alvin, just call me and I'll hook you up with him.
I might do that. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Sean. It was nice meeting you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too.
You're
Thanks again to Wade Kirkpatrick for stopping by and talking about the 1974 Alabama State Football Championship team. Now be on the lookout for the book, Fighting Patriots, the First 3 Years of Homewood High School Football, which should be out this spring. We'll do our best to help promote this book, and we'll put a link in the show notes when it becomes available. There's also a link to Wade's other book of fiction called Lightning Storm, and it's written under the pen name Patrick Kirk. You can find it on Amazon.com. Stay tuned for other editions of the podcast as we celebrate other milestones in Homewood. And as always, we'll have more stories about Shades Cahaba. See you next time on the Shades Cahaba Oral History Project.